Women of Reddit, we've had a lot of sticking your dong in crazy questions. What happened when crazy stuck their dong in you? He was troubled. Father was an alcoholic who killed himself. A fact he managed to bring up anytime I attempted to end it. He tried to convince me to run away with him. We were 17/18. But I rebuffed him time and again. It didn't help that my mother adored him and we went to different schools. So, I'd come home and he'd already be there waiting for me. Every day, after I finally broke it off, he'd drive by my house at all hours and leave gifts on my porch. A few months later, he got a new girl and I began dating a friend of his. They decided we should all hang out. So one evening we rent a movie and grab some booze. My ex and his girl immediately started making out hardcore, which didn't bother me. But when she started moaning, I glanced over and he's eyeballing me, like, tongue down her throat, hand in her pants, all while staring straight at me. So I faked ill and walked home. On my way, he pulled his car up next to me and offered me a ride. I said frick off. Then he started screaming at me from his car. Don't you get it? I'd do anything for you. I love you. I'd die for you. I ran the rest of the way, cutting through yards so he couldn't follow me. When I got home I was nearly crying. I was so frightened. My dad saw me come through the door and started flipping out, assuming my new boyfriend had done something awful. Fearing my boyfriend would catch crap, I finally explained everything about the ex. I felt so dumb and guilty, and cried like an idiot. My dad just listened and tucked me into bed. The next morning, I looked out the window to find the ex's car across the street. By the time I got downstairs, my dad was walking back inside and the car was speeding down the road. Dad evenly said, I talked to him, and that was that. Never saw ex again. You really gotta love a good dad. He refused to let me break up with him because he wasn't getting a choice in it, then threatened to throw himself in the river. When I got upset at that he said he wasn't going to, that was just him not giving me a choice. He refused to let me break up with him because he wasn't getting a choice in it, thereby denying you your choice in it, making him a hypocrite as well as a manipulator. If relationships worked like that where you both had to agree to split, then the world would be a much sadder place. I tried to break up with my high school boyfriend of 3 years 4 times before it finally stuck. Whenever I tried, he'd hold me against walls and cry, tell me I wasn't allowed to leave him. He once cornered me and played with a knife as he told me how much he loved me. The last time, I broke up with him over text because I feared for my life. Duh. I was trying to avoid that and not be crappy, but it had to be done. His mom called me saying he was running around the house threatening to kill himself. I could hear him yelling in the background things to tell me, and that I needed to get over there and say sorry. I hung up on her and never spoke to him again. Oh, did I mention I kept trying to dump him cause he had a whole other girlfriend of like 6 months? He turned into a gaslighting textbook sociopath. He pushed one of those standing rotating fans on me while I was asleep. I woke up and he was just completely pee off. I had no idea why. He told me he was talking to me while I was sleeping and I rolled over so that I wasn't facing him. Apparently that infuriated him. He was a terrible person. That relationship only lasted about 5 months. It was a nightmare. His lies gradually unraveled over time. By the time I got the courage to dump him, it had come out that he had been unemployed for 3 years, was still divorcing his wife, who was also his only relationship ever, who he had been abusive toward, and had restraining orders against him. When I broke up with him he called me every name in the book, then proposed, then threatened self-harm. He would leave sobbing voicemails from different throwaway numbers, accused me of turning him into an alcoholic, and still occasionally pops up as having viewed any new social media accounts despite our relationship having been just a few months several years ago. His next ex wound up calling me for advice when he gave her the same treatment. Sounds just like my ex-husband, except for the alcoholic part. Add in a dose of identity theft. He maxed out all my credit cards on Apple and Lego products as a final thank you for supporting him on my single income through our 4 years together. I learned a valuable lesson from him. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a person is to tell them number. A lot less humor and a lot more violence than stick your dong in crazy threads. About an equal amount of manipulation and suicidal threats though. He was always super sweet and casual around friends. part of my extended friend group in college. Extremely good looking and charming. All the girls wanted him, so I was really flattered when he'd single me out. Ended up back at his place after a party. Figured we might make out fool around, but I was younger than he was and a virgin. He asked for a BJ but then held my face and wouldn't let me up for air. Violent as frick, and I vomited. He didn't care at all. Then he took my underwear off, and even though I was screaming no, he fricked me. I had a tampon in because I was on my period and I don't think he even noticed. Waited till he passed out in the vomit and blood and walked home. You don't really know what anybody is like behind closed doors. Needless to say, I'm rocking some serious trust issues now. That's so freaking horrible. I'm so sorry you went through that. I'm sending my love your way. You really can never tell, which is so awful. I've found that the most charming men can be the most vicious. I didn't even sleep with him. I took him home but he freaked me out, so I asked him to leave. He sent me a barrage of texts and called me constantly for 2 months. He turned up outside my house at 3 AM and told me to come out or he'd come in. He alternated between abusive and aggressive, and acting like we were dating, which we had never. He eventually went away, but I learned he'd just moved on to bothering another girl in town. Frick you, Joe. I only kissed him and he went all the way off the deep end. He memorized my class schedule and my general walking route so he could catch me in the halls between classes. Then one day I notice he's on the same bus as me. I'd never seen him on the bus before. It was very obvious that he was following me home since I walked through a large empty field to get from my bus to my house. After that day I frequently saw him walking past my house or wandering through the neighborhood. I stopped going on runs or walking by myself. I was only 14 so I couldn't drive. I took the bus everywhere, so this guy put me under house arrest. I was afraid to be home alone, but I also didn't have the ability to go anywhere without my parents. Eventually I told my dad what was going on and he started standing outside menacingly and stopped the kid stalking me and told him if he ever saw him near our house again he would be calling the police. Despite being the nicest guy in the world, my dad can look really scary. Eventually my stalker switched to another girl in our school, then another. After sophomore year he had apparently moved because nobody saw Creepy Mike anymore. Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. I went through a similar experience in middle school, but at least you told someone and they were able to help. We got married, had 2 kids, then he flipped and showed how possessive and controlling and angry he really is. We broke up and then he kicked me out and turned his anger from me to them. Now I have our kids and he has supervised visits. And I have a wonderful boyfriend that the kids adore. I got my confidence and emotional stability back. Frick yeah, so glad for you. Tried to force me to choose between him and many activities that I enjoyed. Super controlling behavior. I tried to break up with him like an adult. He reacted by pretending I wasn't breaking up with him, then escalating to telling me that he was going to take the truck we owned together and my dog and leave me in another state. I switched into survival mode, pretended I wasn't serious about breaking up, and started looking for a way out. He escalated again by reading my emails and telling me which friends I could see and when, and what I could use our truck for. Thank goodness for my friends and Google Incognito mode. I left while he was at work and called him from a rest stop 2 hours away to tell him we were done. Proud of you. Good job. I hope your safety is secured and continues to be. Let's see. Multiples. 1. He turned out to be a pedo who was only into me because I looked about 4 years younger than I was and was underdeveloped. 3 years in I started looking legal, so he got the number of one of the freshmen I was tutoring, got her drunk, and raped her. Called cops. Noped out. He stalked me for months and kept asking me to marry him. 2. Controlled everything about my life from my job down to my hair color and diet. He proposed. Then one day I got a letter from his wife. He tried to lie his way out of it. Noped out. 3. Turns out he was a sex addict. He fricked every willing female he could find. Names not required. He got frustrated and raped me while I was recovering from abdominal surgery. Resulted in my child. He left me after the baby was born because he wanted a girl. He later broke into my house through a window, broke the glass, and stole a bunch of stuff. Currently owes a frick ton of child support. I am terrified by the fact that he wanted a girl baby. So I never slept with him. thankfully, but he was insane. We had known each other for a while, but on a weekend trip as a group I noticed he was starting to be flirty. After the trip he would call me and talk. Then one day he said, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life with you." Weird, but at the time thought it was oddly romantic. Fast forward to recognizing he's very controlling, telling me what to wear, who to talk to, ignoring my requests and specifically doing the opposite of what I ask. I realize I can't deal with this and let him know I need to take a break from the relationship. I didn't want to hurt his feelings and was trying to let him down gently. That was a big mistake. He continues to call me every day. A situation occurs where I am upset and I tell him I'm mad. And he says, "Oh, I have a few minutes, want to call?" I said sure, thinking we're going to talk about why I'm upset. I start to explain, and he cuts me off saying he doesn't have time to talk about why I'm mad. I ask him what he is calling for and he says he just wants to hear me talk about positive things about him. I hung up. Anyways, in May I tell this guy I no longer want to date officially, and he doesn't get it. He comes to my house, or when there's group events he picks me up instead of my other rides. He tells me about how great he is and how I'm making him feel he's trash because I don't want to be in a relationship with him since it's upsetting him. A group of us go to a breakfast cafe and he tells everyone he saved me a spot, right next to him of course. Our newly married friends were talking about us coming over to have dinner and that they'd love to get to know us more and chat. He was actively telling people we were together after I broke up with him. I told my friends that he and I were just friends. Later he tells me I offended his manhood, and how dare I talk about him in front of others in that way. I apparently needed to learn not to insult him. All I said was BTWM and I are just friends. Anyway, since May that year he would leave flowers, ambush me, isolate me from the group to talk to me about how we are perfect together, try to convince me we are still dating, etc. I told him many times in many different ways we aren't dating. I want to be single. I can't be in a relationship for my mental health RN. So many ways and he still didn't get it. I finally just stopped responding completely. One day he randomly calls me after a week of nothing from him and says he thinks we are better as friends but we don't really work as a couple. I tried so hard not to laugh. I told him I agree and he sounded a bit surprised by that. Then he told me he releases me. I told him I release you too. Hung up and laughed my head off. This was in September. He was insane. I release you, what a crack up. Crazy no. One held me up in one hand and went to punch me with the other hand, as a very slight 18-year-old girl, because I hid his car keys when he wanted to drive home absolutely wasted. Crazy no. 2 was arrested a couple of years after we dated, in connection with a teenage girl being found dead in a suitcase. His best friend was convicted. I stayed for 19 years until it crystallized for me that yes, everyone was right. He is crazy. Finally got my life back. And yes, he still drives by my house. More little than the other responses I've read, but when crazy stuck their dong in me for the first and last time, they said it was wrapped when it wasn't. Things ended there. 2 months later I ordered chicken penne somewhere and couldn't get a single bite down. I freaking love chicken and pasta and it was like I was trying to eat hot garbage. Surprise pregante. I terminated it, ruining my mental health for years to come. No regrets, but not something I took lightly either. When he moved out of our student dorms I was unlucky enough to be hanging out outside, at which point he cornered me, kissed me full on the mouth and said he'd never forget me. I think that's called stealthing now, and I think stealthers need a swift kick in the groin. He didn't stick his dong in anything. He was a friend of a friend and we talked at a house party, exchanged numbers and borrowed a book of his. This was before smartphones. Dude started calling me every day, multiple times a day, and eventually confessed to me that he believed that he was chosen by God to defend me in the coming apocalypse. He would show up at my house. This was right after high school and I still lived with my parents, and try to come inside. He panicked when I was ignoring and avoiding him because he was trying to make sure we were ready to rebuild civilization and fight demons. He was dead serious. I finally answered his call one day, told him I wasn't interested in being friends anymore and I didn't want to get involved in his plans. I didn't give him any explanation. He wanted to come pick up his book and somehow handled it pretty well when I said I'd get back to him about it. I got his address from my friend and my dad and I dropped off the book at his house at a strange hour so that I could tell him he already had it back and to leave me alone. I moved out pretty quickly after that and found out he moved out of state. Sounds like schizophrenia. Sad for him but not your problem. My friend dated a guy briefly who was lucid at the time but 2 years later he was on trial for kidnapping 2 adults because the gator hack was in their backyard. Bro, there was one guy who I only dated twice. He had already picked out kids' names. No woo. The next was an Italian exchange student who I was just friendly to because he appeared so lonely. One cup of tea led to a huge sheet of paper with love decelerations. And I saw him following me about the city so I had the campus warden talk to him. Definitely dodged 2 really crazy guys. We actually hear about it all the time. We just don't call it that. Stalking, domestic violence, obsession, possession, actual violence, and intimate partner assault and murder are all instances of crazy sticking its dong in us. But it rarely becomes a story that we can look back on and laugh at. None of this is to say that female on male or same-sex domestic violence aren't a thing. Just that the consequences are not lethal nearly as often, and society is less likely to encourage victims to stay in those toxic relationships in the first place. He broke up with me and a few months later, I was staying over at a friend's. I was doing dishes in the kitchen and my friend's brother was also in the kitchen cooking. He had his shirt off but that was how he usually walked around the house. My ex called to ask me what I was doing. I told him it was none of his business. He asked me why I was in the kitchen with friend's brother with his shirt off. Turns out he had followed me to my friend's house and was across the street looking through binoculars into the kitchen window. He threatened to come into the house but he didn't have the balls. It was still creepy though. Looking back, wish I would have grabbed my friend's brother and made out with him in front of the window. What the actual frick? Poured alcohol into my vagina when the condom broke to kill the sperm. Odds against my will because that shirt hurt so bad. Don't recommend. What the actual frick? Got 2 crazy exes. Both told me in the end of our relationship that they hated everyone in their lives except me. Both told me they were suicidal after our breakup. A girl I know befriended ex number 1 after our breakup and he had told her that he wished to kill my cat and write on my house with its blood "You're next." Their friendship ended shortly after. During our last date, ex number 2 told me he thought he was a psychopath because he doesn't care about people and their emotions and doesn't feel empathy at all. After our breakup he stalked me through my menstrual cycle app. He had the app on his phone so he could be more empathic towards me when I was having my PMS. But after our breakup I asked him to delete the app and he said that he already deleted it and saw that I had gotten an emergency contraceptive. He went on texting me asking for an explanation. Later I also heard from a friend that he has nudes of me and that he likes to keep them so he has power over me. Don't know why these guys ended up being crazy. They seemed normal guys when I fell in love with them but they turned out being crazy during the relationship. I always want to give everyone a chance, as I always see the good things in people, but sometimes it's better to acknowledge the red flags. We hooked up on Friday. 2 days later he was standing outside my door telling me to get dressed and that we were going on a walk. He was being pretty loud and I had already gotten a noise complaint from my neighbors so I decide to go with him. We're on a walk and I steer us towards the tourist parts of the city so we won't be alone. About 10 minutes into our walk he asks me, "Are you seeing other guys?" Reminder, I met him 2 days ago. I say no, but he replies with okay. Then it was the blonde guy I saw yesterday. Turns out he has been following me the last 2 days and I start freaking out. I tell him I have to go back home and he says he's going to go with me there for safety. He then starts talking about our future marriage, that he will take me to his parents in 2 weeks and that he wants kids when we're still young. I kissed him bye and ran into my apartment and didn't leave for days. Saw him on my street a couple months later but never talked to him again. Reminds of my Bumble experiences. The nostalgia of fear on dates. Nothing personally happened to me, other than being outcasted by my entire town of 3k people. No one bothered to tell me my new boyfriend was a rapist. Everyone knew, but didn't bother to tell me anything. After I found out, I immediately dumped him. All of this happened in a week. He was found with loads of drugs on him on Sunday, bailed out on Tuesday, put his dad in the hospital on Wednesday, withdrew $20k out of his dad's account on Thursday, and disappeared Friday morning. No one's seen him in 3 years. I'm glad I didn't get tied in with that. Was supposed to be a one-night stand, no commitment, exactly what I was after. Next morning, he starts talking relationship and how this is so much more and how we were just so sexually compatible. Nope, the sex sucked. And in daylight I could see he hasn't cleaned his house in years and middle-aged, not kids, and relationship? I made it dead clear that wasn't happening, right at the start. I don't do commitment or relationships unless he's super special. He wasn't. Nice guy, just immature. He kept after me for a week, wanting to tell people we knew together that we were a couple, and then said he was devastated when I had to get blunt with him, because not interested in a relationship isn't blunt enough, and tell him that there was zero chance ever. He hasn't talked to me since, which I'm quite alright with. He seems to think we've suddenly gotten divorced and is playing the victim card to our friends. Freaking insane. Just wanted a little fun. Apparently, that's the cue for picking out curtains. In daylight I could see he hasn't cleaned his house in years and middle-aged, not kids. Heck, poor hygiene was a sexual turn-off for me in my 20s. He convinced me that his pre-existing alcohol problem was my fault, that I was controlling him by asking him not to get drunk every day and spend all our money on alcohol and cigarettes. Told me it was my fault that I was depressed, and that my panic attacks were me trying to get attention. Guilted me into sleeping with him. Screamed at me in the street on multiple occasions. Brought drug dealers to our house. Kept me up all night arguing, shouting when I had work the next day. Threatened to smash the front door in when I finally had enough and told him to leave. 3 AM. He was drunk. I had left him in the pub hours before and told him not to come home. I let him in because I feared he'd damage the house and I'd lose my deposit, be charged for the damage. Called the police and they told me to leave because he doesn't seem that drunk. He's being reasonable. I still hate myself for staying with him for 4 freaking years. He decided to change duty stations and PCS to Japan when he found out that's where I was being stationed. Not even on the same island. A guy made an anonymous Facebook and told me he saw me around and loved me. He knew the bar I hung out at, the street I lived on, and about what house was mine. At one point he told me he was skulking around in my backyard. He kept messaging me offers for the best sex of my life if I met up with him and wouldn't tell me who he was. He freaked out when I broke it off with him. Threatened to jump off the parking garage to off himself. Stalked me online for about 2 years and then, 6 years post breakup, found me on OKC and sent me a message saying I was the only one for him and he's been pining over me for 6 years. Thinks about me every day and he will never date anyone else. Freaking nuts, man. When we broke up, he followed me on a date, cornered me coming back from the restroom and grabbed me so I couldn't move past and threatened to slit his wrists if I didn't leave the date immediately. Went on a date with a guy. No, I didn't sleep with him, but a story is a story. Who got mad I couldn't order anything at the cafe we went to, then proceeded to take me to another place a 20-minute bus away so I could eat, but didn't care when I couldn't order there either. Told me about his plans to rob a bank, and how his friend very illegally obtained an assault rifle in Australia, but before executing this plan, said friend got locked up for the M-Lab he was running in his shed. Yikes. I decide to be nice now, leave ASAP and ghost later because frick that gear, but not before. 1. He says it's okay if guys do drugs but if women do it's gross. 2. The second place we went to was his workplace because he didn't want to pay for my food, not that I could eat or wouldn't pay for myself. 3. He had to go to court the next day because his ex claimed he physically assaulted him. I think I believe her. I ghost him, but 4 months later he messages me again calling me ugly, a junkie S, and a B alongside a picture of him in the bathroom mirror shirtless, skinny boy abs and all with the caption "See what you're missing out on." I wonder what prison he's definitely in now. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.